The heart of the matter. Hello, everybody. I'm Parker Pruitt, and thank you for joining me on the Inseparable Podcast. Well, folks, today I want to talk about the heart. Your heart, my heart, your neighbor's heart, everybody's heart. Ever since I was a little kid, I heard in church, and I'm sure you have too, all about the heart. Jesus lives in your heart, or he better, right? Uh, he better live in your heart, and you better show it, right? Um, and I always wondered why we didn't say, does Jesus live in your mind? Does Jesus live in your bones? Does Jesus live in your head, in your toes, in your hands, just wherever? Why the heart? Why does it have to be the heart? And as I grew older, I learned that heart can be kind of synonymous with your spirit man or your inner man, um, and which kind of leads one to believe that it really has more to do with your attitude. One could say it like this, you know, um, does is Jesus shown in your attitude instead of your spirit or your heart? You could just replace that with attitude. Um, and that's kind of all they're all kind of synonymous with each other. um, but I think we kind of get confused, especially newer Christians probably get confused about like why the heart, of all things. Well, it really has more to do with your attitude and your spirit than anything else. Not your physical beating heart, but your inner willpower, your attitude about um, your circumstances or anything around you. So on this podcast episode, I want to talk about, uh, the fact that God has a way of presenting obstacles, circumstances, life scenarios, situations to us that bring forth growth, that brings forth um, healing and stuff we need to deal with in our hearts or in our thoughts, in our the way we process things, in our emotions. He brings healing. He can also bring destruction, but in a good way, right? He destroys the sin in your life, and sometimes that can be uncomfortable. But nonetheless, it does happen, and that's what he is most concerned with. Um, he is more concerned with our heart or our inner man than our outer man, our physical appearance, our looks, what we look like. Um, First Samuel, I can't remember which chapter it says, but it says that God is more concerned with the heart than the outward appearance. Like when he selected David to be king of Israel, um, he looked not at his small stature, but that's what man looks at, right? That's what man saw was like this tiny little kid versus Goliath, the enemy, this 9 foot Goliath, or 11 foot, whatever he was. So God doesn't look at human things like we do through our human eyes. He doesn't look at us with through that lens. He looks at us through the eyes of the heart, right? So that's what he's concerned with: repairing, restoring, fixing, healing. And the reason why I wanted to focus in on this topic specifically today was really just because I've been pondering on it lately, how God draws out of your heart, rather, um, things that you probably don't even know that's there, right? He's going to in the future, and he has done in the past, and he's doing so right now. He's taking things out of your heart and presenting them to you, and showing you like, hey, this doesn't belong here, or hey, this needs worked out, right? This needs burnt up, destroyed. Give this to me to consume, because he's a consuming fire. Um, so we have to deal with these things that are in our heart, so to speak. At times, you might feel complete. You might feel like God's first cousin. You might feel, like you've got it all figured out and you can handle anything that God throws at you. But let me remind you that we're all human and we're all works in progress. If we're breathing here on this planet, We got something to learn, right? So keep that in mind as you go through life. I want to move on to a couple of verses in Psalm 51. Psalm 51 is a pretty cool psalm. If you haven't read it, I'm going to read the first 10 I'm sorry, 10 verses of Psalm 51. And it's right after, just to set the scene for you, it's right after David, if you don't know the story, David lusts after Bathsheba and commits adultery, gets her pregnant, yada yada yada. I'll let you figure out the rest of the story, but but this is like the aftermath of having to deal with his sin, having to deal with the aftermath of his affair. So that's the scene. So you can probably draw some empathy or some sympathy with him, or some like, well, that's what you deserve, you know. But we've all sinned, right? We've all fallen short of God's glory. You know, there no one's perfect. Um, it might not be as extreme as an affair, but it might be something like I can relate. Like I've had a bad day, you know, and I've slipped up, I've sinned pretty bad, and the next day it's like, man, I'm down on myself, and I need God to pick me up. So that's kind of where David is right now when he's singing this. He says, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you only, have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart." That's a key phrase right there. I'm going to repeat. Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being, talking about one's spirit, one's attitude, one's heart, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Didn't even know there was a secret heart. uh, Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. So that kind of like summarizes what I'm trying to say right now. Um, that some things have to be revealed to us. I'm sure David didn't even realize he had that lustful spirit about him, right? He didn't even probably know he had that to work out of him. The Bible says to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, or with awe and trembling. um, that's what this looks like. It's not all pretty. It's not all roses and rainbows, right? This is ugly stuff sometimes. Working out your salvation, right? Not working for our salvation, but working out our salvation. Working out the bad stuff that doesn't belong there, that God didn't create, the false man that we create, or the world kind of tells us we are, and creates this new man in us, right? It presents the new man that Christ is within us. So, you know, this is being presented to David like, hey, you need to deal with this, you know? And unfortunately, his turned out, you know, to be an affair with another woman, and ended up having another child and everything like that. So there's there's baggage that comes with sin, right? But you know, that punishment is built into the cake, is baked into the cake of sin. And so we have to deal with the aftermath of that sometimes. But God is graceful and merciful, and he's just purging this stuff out of our hearts. um and and, and the same goes for us, guys. Same goes for us, whether we deal with lust, um you know, whatever your sin is, you know. It could be a plethora of things: greed, anger, envy, overindulging, alcohol, drugs, you name it, right? Um, but God is presenting you obstacles and challenges in life to work those things out. He's giving you scenarios in life and meeting new people in life to work those things out of you and to heal your broken heart. I heard a story from a prophet named Rob Sanchez. He is a really, really good friend of mine, and he's out in California, but I've heard him preach several times, and he's given me several prophecies that have just been like, wow, that's spot on. So uh, he's kind of been a fundamental part of my faith in the last probably 10 years. But he told a story that always stuck with me. And that was God, and I might be messing up some of the details in the story, but the gist of it was God showed him a vision that he was like on either like another planet, or it might have been like the moon. It just there was like all sorts of like craters that he was walking through, and I don't know if he was driving or walking, but he was going through all these craters and mountains and valleys and hills and rivers and all these all this different, crazy scene, and he said that God showed him that this wasn't a plan, or this wasn't where he thought he was. This was actually Rob's heart. And mind you, he's a prophet. He's an evangelist. He goes around preaching the gospel all over the world. Really has thousands of listeners on YouTube and all sorts of platforms. And God tells him that this is his heart. You would think, his heart would be like a pasture of green, and just lush, vegetation and all that stuff. But no, like even somebody like that I model myself after, or like that I try to, imitate a little bit, in a way, or look up as to an example. Um, Somebody like that, is somebody who God is working stuff out of, right? So, like I said, we're not perfect. We're all human beings. So even him that has this huge following, and um, God showed him that picture of his heart. It was like, these are some things that you haven't even discovered yet that you still have to work out, or that I still have to work out of you, and clean up some messes, right? It could be hurt, some bitterness going on that causes some cracks. It could be anger and frustration that's causing some mountains and some hills that, just um, as an analogy. Um, for me, it was, one of my examples were road rage. I had terrible road rage when I first got home from the Navy. Because I mean, I didn't really drive too much when I was in the Navy in Spain, from ages 18 to 22. When I got home in 2017, I um, just wasn't you really used to traffic and driving, in Kansas City, and just it was really kind of just a daunting task, and I was real short fused for whatever reason. Like I felt like I was great with people once I was out of the car, but once I got in the car, it was like a psychological thing. I was like flipped a switch, and I become, somebody you don't want to come across on the road. I just, cut people off. I won't say what else I did, but yeah, it was not pretty, and it come to a point actually that I had, like, embarrassingly, I admit, and this was years ago. This was maybe BC, before Christ, but um, I rolled down my window, and this guy had rolled down his window, and we exchanged some words, and we ended up driving our separate ways. But I'm like, I gotta I gotta do some introspection here. you know, this is ridiculous. I was like, I just felt disgusted and disappointed with myself. I'm like, this isn't who God created me to be. I gotta switch up before I get myself hurt, somebody else hurt, somebody, in trouble, myself in trouble. Like, and it's more importantly, I'm not proud of it. I wasn't proud of who I was at that point in my life. Just in that little example, or that little facet of my life, and I knew God wasn't, proud of that, behavior. So I felt like I needed to change and switch up. And I'm like, been good ever since that little revelation that God showed me. It's like, this is enough is enough. The buck stops here, and you have to make a conscious decision. Like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And ever since then, I've just been like, water off a duck's back, just um, drive the speed limit. My wife probably gets annoyed that I drive the speed limit somewhat, just I just set it on cruise, and I cruise, if somebody wants to cut me off, okay, cool, thumbs up, and, like, what would Jesus do? Right. You got to go back to the basics. But it happens at work too. Um, Someone will say something, as a police officer, if you don't know, I am a police officer. I've been a police officer for 5 years now. And, um, we get, uh, as you can imagine, some crazy clientele, who just run their mouths constantly, call you every name in the book. And some of those names kind of triggered some old stuff that I forgot about, like big ears and big nose and all this stuff. It's like, man, come on. Like, this stuff that I've dealt with in junior high and elementary school, I don't need to deal with that right now as an adult, but it made me realize, like, I still had some, like, getting over to do, right? I had some maturing to do. I have to bite my tongue. Now it concerns my profession, right? And got to be the bigger person sometimes. You got to walk away and keep your cool. But whether it's, the way you look, the way you talk, your self image, people will find ways to attack you, right? So you got to just ignore it, right? Ignore the noise, and you got to realize that that might be God pulling something out of your heart that needs healed. Like, hey, like, I see your heart. I don't see your outward appearance. Yes, I created that, but He's more concerned with the appearance of your heart, and how you treat people is what He's more concerned with. Um, it's like the old saying goes, some people just know how to push your buttons, and you got to be ready for that. And God will bring those people to your life to push your buttons, to, like, test you. The Lord tests your heart. Um, and actually, that brings me to a couple of verses I want to share with you that I highlighted. Um, there's probably three or four verses that I want to point out to you. And it's just that. It's Proverbs 17:3. It's one of my favorite verses. It says, the crucible is for silver, or for making silver, and the furnace is for gold, and the Lord tests the heart. So it's talking about kind of like an analogy there. Um, in the same way that gold and silver is refined and heated up and tested, for the impurities to be, uh, burnt off or whatever, the Lord does the same thing with our hearts. So how does He do that? That's not like a literal thing. It's a metaphor, right? Um, the Lord, in that same way, tests your heart, tests your spirit. He's going to give you these challenges. He's going to give you these people in your life that you have to overcome, that you have to realize that they're there for a lesson, to be learned. And it might be a lesson, it might be healing to bring forth, whatever the case may be. Isaiah 48:10, behold, I have refined you. This is the Lord speaking through the prophet Isaiah. He says, behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction. Affliction means bad times, right? Tribulations, hardships. Maybe it's a loss of a family member, right? I just laid to rest my godmother. Um, that, brings hurt, right, and grief in us, and and that's all a part of it, right? That's all a part of your emotions and your heart, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's all natural. But that's another way that God can test your heart. And the last couple of verses is Malachi 3, verses 2 and 3. It says, but who can endure the day of his coming, and who can stand when he appears? Talking about God. For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi, and refine them like gold and silver, and they will bring offerings in righteousness to the Lord. So, the main thing with this message that I want to convey to you is God pulls things out of your heart, right? He pulls things out in various ways. They can be through challenging people, challenging circumstances, life events, um, but he's always testing your heart to see if it's pure, right? He wants you to become more pure. So that's his goal, is he's leading you and guiding you. And sometimes that's not an easy process. Sometimes that's extremely difficult, but to endure. But at the end of the day, he's refining you and making you more like himself. It's all a matter of the heart. And that is the heart of the matter. I hope you guys enjoyed this message and learned something from this message. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. God bless you all.